projections. Moving on to slide 7, we're now looking at South Africa's sovereign credit rating. We notice that it has deteriorated because the country has been downgraded by Moody to a sub-investment status, or what is popularly known as junk status. So this means that all 3 rating agencies now have downgraded South Africa to the junk status, with serious implication. For instance, our poor credit rating means that there will be an increase in the interest rate that we are charged on government debt when we go to capital markets to borrow money that we need to plug the gap that we have in our fiscal deficit, for instance. And we know already that 15 cents of every rand that we collect currently goes to the payment of interest rate on debt. So this means that if that rate increases, it is crowding out other important investments that will help the country, for instance, to restore growth and continue to pursue all other development initiatives. So that is going to impact negatively on our development as a country. Slide 12 now is just the same diagram. What I want to note there is just that there is a risk that the country might slide further into the junk status, because we see there that if, for instance, S&P can downgrade us further, we are going to what we call highly speculative territory, where we are deep into the junk status, and that will come with serious economic consequences. The next thing that we are looking at is the budget deficit, and we want to note that the 2020 budget announced already a widening budget deficit, and that was before COVID-19. So the impact of COVID-19 is that it will further worsen the budget deficit, and the implications there that our fiscal space will shrink, and that then there will be a possibility of further deteriorating of our credit rating, because the credit rating agents are interested in how we're managing the deficit, and also how the economy is performing. So if now we look at slide 14, it represents the fiscal slippage that was announced by the 2020 budget. For instance, if you look at the 2 bars that we're interested in that graph is the blue one, which represents the 29 budget, and then the green one that represents the 2020 budget. So we see if we look specifically at the 2020-21 column, we see that the budget deficit is projected to increase from negative 4.3 to negative 6.8. So there is already a vast difference that was announced by the 2020 budget with the implication of increasing the budget deficit. Same thing if we look at the next set of bars, which is 2021-22, we see that the projected deficit there increased from -4 to -0.62. If you look at the 2019 budget and we compare it with the budget 2020. So what we're saying there is that already, even before COVID-19, the budget deficit was already increasing. If we move on to now slide 15, where we begin now to see the impact of COVID-19, we see that COVID-19 will make things worse. Those 2 lines there, the blue line represents the 2020 budget, which we've already spoken about in the previous slide, that in 2020, for instance, the budget deficit will be -6.8, and then in 2021, it will be -6.2. But that already has been revised downwards by the IMF, stating that in 2020, we'll see a budget deficit of -13.3, and then in 2021, we'll see a budget deficit of -12.7. So the difference between those 2 lines, the blue line and the red line, they represent the impact of COVID-19 on the budget deficit. So the last thing that we're looking at is the government debt the fact that it is also increasing, and it was increasing even before COVID-19, mainly because of weak growth and the contingent liabilities from state-owned entities, in particular ESCOM, and the fact that because of that, the 2020 budget announced a higher government debt trajectory, like I said before, even COVID-19. So what COVID-19 has done is it has also, just like in the budget deficit, it has worsened the government debt. And we see that in the following slide, slide 17, which then compare the 2019 budget and the 2020 budget. We see that blue line now, actually the red line that starts to even go up, representing an increasing government debt. So government debt increases up to 71.6% of GDP in 2022-23. If you compare that with the increase that was announced in the previous budget in the 29 budget, you see that the government debt as a percent of GDP was at 58.9, for instance, projected for 58.9% in 2021-2022. But if you look at the 2020 budget, it increased that to 69.1% of GDP. So we see already that there was an increase that was announced by the 2020 budget before COVID-19. And now if we then look at what COVID-19 has done to government debt, we see that green line represents the IMF projections that puts the government debt even higher. For instance, in 2020, whereas the 2020 budget puts the government debt as a percentage of GDP at 65.6, the IMF says it will increase to 77.4, and then in 2021 it will increase from 69.1 to 85.6% of GDP. So already the COVID-19, you can see that difference between those two lines, the blue line and the green line, represents again the increase that is due to the impact of COVID-19. So we see that in both the budget deficit and the government debt as a percentage of GDP, the COVID-19 will make the situation worse. Chairperson, I will end here, and then I will hand over to my colleague Sasha to continue with the next section. Thank you.
Continue.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. The next few slides provide a recap of what was presented to this committee at the beginning of March regarding the FFC's views on the 2020 budget as tabled in February. And we'll just touch on some of the highlights. So, Nomfundo, if we can move to slide 21, please. So this slide shows real growth by functional category and provides a sense of government's priorities as at the time of budget 2020. And that figure on the slide provides a look back at what happened over the period 2016-17 to 2019-20, which is reflected by the blue bars. And then it looks forward at what was being projected over the next 3 years, which are reflected by the red bars. Now, to summarize, over the period 2016-17 to 2019-20, real growth trends revealed a distinct social focus, with education, health, and social development being the drivers of growth amongst the different sector departments. Over the next 3 years, Budget 2020 was projecting a slight shift in focus, with the economic development, community development, and social development departments being relatively protected and growing positively. Alongside this, the peace and security function, which includes, for example, your defense, police, and home affairs departments, was set to bear much of the brunt of the deprioritization or cuts that were required. And the health sector was projected to grow marginally by 0.5% per annum over the next 3 years. But given the pandemic and associated challenges, this set of expenditure priorities will need to be rethought. And just to draw your attention, alongside the relative prioritization of the different sectors, of concern, if you look at the last two bars in that figure, is the crowding out of fiscal space for service delivery as a result of strong real growth in debt service costs. So Budget 2020 projection showed that by 2022-23, spending on debt service costs would be larger than spending on health and even community development. If we move to the next slide, slide 22, please. This slide provides an overview of the allocations and real annual average growth by economic classification. And if you look at the last column in the table, we see evidence of government's attempts. Slide 22, please, Nomfundo. If you look at the last column in that table on slide 22, we see evidence of government's attempts to rein in personnel spending over the next 3 years, with projections showing a real annual average reduction of 1% per annum in personnel spending. Alongside this, Budget 2020 had put relatively strong emphasis on capital spending, which was projected to grow at just under 5% per annum over the next 3 years. But again, given the pandemic and related pressures, this picture is likely to change as non-essential infrastructure projects are cut and funding reprioritized. The next two slides, 23 and 24, speak to the anticipated underperformance of tax revenue. As at the time of Budget 2020, government had left the tax structure mostly intact, except for making adjustments for inflation. And the argument there was that attempting to increase revenues through taxes would be more likely to hamper economic recovery. As at April 2020, the South African Revenue Service has indicated that revenue performance will be between 15 and 20% lower than what was projected at the time of Budget 2020. And this translates to a projected under-recovery of 285 billion. And the figure on that slide just hones in on underperformance recovery just for April, which stood at about 9 billion. If we move to slide 25, please, Nomfundo, just to summarize, the key points regarding the Commission's views on the 2020 appropriations as at the beginning of March was, firstly, the Commission had welcomed the greater emphasis that Budget 2020 had placed on economic development, community development, and social development. We believe that this approach should ensure, on the one hand, a safety net for the poor through your social security grants and basic services, alongside interventions to grow the economy. Secondly, we had cautioned against the emergence of an unhealthy composition of spending, where Budget 2020 projections showed the escalation of debt service costs, and whereby these costs would exceed spending on health and community development by the end of the MTF period. And thirdly, the Commission had welcomed government's attempts to rein in spending on personnel, but noted that containing the wage bill was one of the key risks in the 2020 budget. Chair, I'll now hand over to my colleague, Mr. Eddie Rakabi, to take you through the next section.
Good morning, Chairperson. Hello?
Please, yes, please continue. I said I'll talk to you guys after 45 minutes.
All right. Going straight to slide number 27, which talk to how the fiscal framework was performed before the COVID-19 hit us. So basically what we're indicating here is that COVID-19 hit the South African economy when it was already on a cyclical downturn, and the budget that was presented in February this year, it really provided little impetus for growth, with expenditure growing at a negative rate in real terms. So the table below just shows some of the fiscal variables there. As you can see, expenditure, even though it was growing positively nominally, but when you take into account the effect of inflation, you find that it was really growing at a negative 1%. So already it meant that some of our spending programs are really under pressure because there was no growth in the budget. Slide 22, Nomfundo. Slide 22. Slide 28. Slide 28 really shows that the fiscal framework that was tabled in February is no longer attainable as a result of COVID-19 induced economic slump. The estimates which my colleague has indicated earlier, Tando, which indicate that the economy is likely to contract by 6 to 16%, depending on its longevity. So in this table, basically, we're showing the likely effect on some of the fiscal variables. So, for instance, if we, in the unlikely event that the economy contracts by 16%, what we may likely to see, as the table shows below, is that the revenue, we're going to have a revenue shortfall of about 22 billion, which is almost similar estimates, which was mentioned by the commissioner of SARS sometimes 2 weeks ago. So again, this is just to indicate the the effects of the COVID-19 should the worst happen. On slide 29, it really here we just show the combined effect of the lockdown on different sectors. So what is really interesting here is that we are likely to see mild effect on sectors which are more labor intensive, like agriculture, forestry, and pharmaceutical, which bodes well for the economy. But on the other hand, where we most likely to see severe decline is on the sectors that are really foreign exchange earning export, such as machinery and iron and steel, and that may likely have implications for our balance of payment. So again, the effects, as I say, it's mostly mildly on sectors that are more likely to preserve jobs, but on the other hand, it might end up with it might also cause problems on our balance of payment and cause us inflation in the long run. On slide 30, slide 30 is just to indicate the manner in which government has responded to COVID-19. Government has introduced a fiscal and monetary response package amounting to 1 trillion. 500 of that comprises of a fiscal support, and another one is made up of the monetary and financial market interventions. So the number of interventions which banks have also introduced, such as payment holidays for bonds and vehicle finance, for instance. So a combination of those makes about 500 billion. The fiscal support is purportedly equivalent to 10%, which is unprecedented, especially for an economy the size of South Africa. When you include the monetary interventions, that the response, the combined response, amounts to about 18% of GDP, which again is really very unprecedented, even higher than the United States, as you can see on the graph below. The slide 28 is just to elucidate the graph which I was talking to much more clearly. I'll skip it. Going to slide 32. Slide 32, just Chairperson here and members, honorable members here, we just indicate some of the policy interventions which are more likely, which are more effective to stimulate the economy or even to relieve the economy when facing a contraction. Some of those may include the extended unemployment insurance benefits. We've seen some of those currently, and nutritional support to the poor households. We've seen government distributing food parcels, fiscal relief for the subnational government. The president announced some relief for the health budgets as well as municipalities. Direct cash transfers for vulnerable people to meet basic needs. Again, there's a 350 cash grants which is being allocated to unemployed people, public employment program, and subsidized budget opportunities. I think this intervention at this current moment will not necessarily be appropriate, especially given the risk of COVID-19. But in the future, I think as and when the crisis subsides, it's one of the interventions to consider. There's also a need for housing subsidies to reduce evictions and homelessness. I think some of the interventions which banks have introduced begin to address this. The slide number 33 is just a breakdown of the fiscal and monetary responses, just to show where the funds will be deployed. I think most of us are more familiar with how the 500 billion fiscal support is going to be spent. 20 billion health sector. There are issues about whether that is adequate or not, but the indications currently is that due to the low levels of hospitalization as a result of COVID-19, there isn't much pressure on the health budget. There's also municipal allocation of 20 billion. The job creation and support for SME amounted to 100 billion, as well as the business loan guarantee for amounted to 200 billion. The monetary response package in the main will include the interest rate reduction. We had a 50 basis point reduction in interest reduction last week. There's also relaxation of credit extension regulation. This is very important, especially to ensure that this loan guarantee scheme that is going to the businesses actually benefit the business, and business can apply for this guarantee scheme with ease. There's a repurchase of bonds in the secondary market, which was announced by the Reserve Bank some weeks ago, and also as well as discretionary credit payment holidays announced by the banks. Slide number 34. Here on slide number 34, we indicate some of the funding sources for the fiscal response. I think what is important to note here is that government has been very vigilant to call its response a stimulus, and there's a number of reasons for that. Our assessment is that only 95 billion of the total fiscal package will constitute a new injection into the budget. And that 95 billion is going to be a debt finance, which is intended to support businesses as well as to protect the jobs. Our assessment, and this is understandable in the sense that the budget was really under pressure, is that there is no discernible baseline increase to the 195 trillion budget that was tabled in February, arising from the 500 billion fiscal package. Part of the reason is because the package is made up of a credit guarantee scheme. There's also borrowing from multilateral finance amounting to 95 billion, transfers and subsidies from social security funds amounted to about 60 billion, as well as there's a social development baseline budget of about 15 billion. Going to slide 35, here is just to indicate some of the policy measures, tax policy measures, which have been introduced by the Treasury, by government. The most important thing here to note is that as much as the tax policy measures are not going to cost the fiscals a lot of money, there's also a revenue cost. And when you combine with the potential shortfall that we have indicated, and which also SARS have also indicated, that the 26 million revenue cost of this tax policy measures is likely to add an additional burden on the budget, which is already under constraint. Slide 36. There's a whole issue about whether what the government has proposed, is it a relief or is it a stimulus? In our assessment is that the fiscal and monetary response in its totality represents a gap filling or relief measure rather than a stimulus. This is because a number of people have actually lost their job, have lost their income earning potential. So before you can even talk about growth or growing the economy, you need to fill the gap, the vacuum that was left by people having lost their job, their income earning potential, and hence we say this is much more of a gap filling and a relief measures, which is necessary at this point in time. So the budget reprioritization and the tax deferrals are likely to have a neutral effect on aggregate expenditure, simply because here we're just shifting the funding and not necessarily adding to anything new. The 200 billion business loan guarantee, in our assessment, is a contingent liability that is likely increase government guarantee exposure from the current 484 to 684 billion. So in this case, there's a need to make sure that the businesses which qualifies for this guarantee, for this loan guarantee scheme, actually make payment, are able to pay for those loans. Because in the unlikely effect that they are unable to pay, this will then put the fiscals even under fiscal strain, because government will have to take up that debt. The impact of the monetary policy depend on several intervening variables. Some of them is household debt income ratio. We've got high levels of indebtedness in the country, and with the interest rate reductions that have been announced, over the past 2 months or so, the likely effect is that people are going to use that relief to pay for their debt rather than to spend or to increase consumption. So as a result, that will have a muted effect on growth, and that is the argument we're making. It also would depend on the eligibility criteria of the loan guarantee scheme and the payment holidays. So if banks and the financial sector continue to be more stricter in their criteria for allocating loans, so a lot of people will not be able to benefit from those schemes, and as a result, money will not flow into the economy. So in our assessment is that high levels of indebtedness are likely to neutralize the mitigating effects of the monetary response to the crisis. And moving to slide 37. Here, in our assessment, we are of view. The Commission is of the view that there is a need to move towards a bolder stimulus, particularly given the fact that the estimates indicate that the economy is likely to contract by up to 20%. So in our view is that the fiscal and monetary policy warrant commencing a much bigger, bolder stimulus. So we are of view that the government needs to deploy much of its balance sheet to deal with the post effects of the COVID-19. And some of the things that we think government can deploy there would be the assets from the PIC, from the GEPF, as well as the South African Foreign Exchange Reserve. As I mentioned earlier, is that only 95 billion of the fiscal response could be considered a fiscal stimulus, and this means that
sorry. Yeah, this is Buthelezi. You're already on injury time, but let's give you the whole team 10 minutes to finish their presentation.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Chairperson. I think I'll just move straight to slide 40, which speak on the overall assessment of the fiscal and monetary response. I think in the Commission's view is that the government's fiscal and monetary response are targeted at policy areas which are proven to reduce economic distress, but the scale of certain programs may need to be increased for maximum impact. Just on the recommendations, Chairperson, I think especially on reform issues, in our view is that because there's likely the fiscal space for government to introduce a much bolder fiscal stimulus is very limited. So in that case, government will need to then focus on reforms. The National Treasury has already introduced the economic transformation paper, which the Commission thinks that should be supported. On slide 42, we just begin to some of the reform areas that the government needs to focus on. The first one being improving governance and fighting corruption. Second one, limiting treasury education subsidies to only poor households. Exposing SA large companies to foreign competition. This is essentially to deal with the high levels of concentration in the economy. On slide 43, the Commission proposes that the government should focus on reducing the cost of broadband and an assignment of high demand spectrum. And this is especially important to deal because we need to now move into e-education. And if you reduce the cost of the broadband, it will make it much more easier to deliver e-learning. And lastly, to strengthen the capacity of the state, as well as to review the means test on most of our government subsidies. Chairperson, let me allow Dr. Mkhululi Ngube to just complete the last few slides. Thank you.
Mkhululi, are you there? Hello.
Please carry on. Sorry, carry on. Yeah, good morning, Chair. Sorry, I muted myself. We are looking at the 130 billion of the 500 billion. Where will this 130 billion come from? We tried as the Commission to identify a number of areas where this 130 billion will come from. And in trying to identify these areas, we look at the basis for our reprioritization on slide 45, whereby we come up with a number of criteria or a number of principles which helped us to identify areas for reprioritization. We are saying there is a need to look at the right-based approach, whereby the basic services, basic rights of people must be protected, especially spending on basic services must be protected. And also in reprioritizing, we should consider equity and fairness. We should also consider spending performance, especially historic performance, that there are no incidences of underspending or irregular or wasteful spending. We also looked at the impact that it must, when we say reprioritize from this line item, it must have the least impact on people's livelihoods and the economy, as well as we looked at spending composition, whereby we are saying if it is spending on new infrastructure or infrastructure which is not related to COVID, it can be postponed, but also we need to look at, we analyze that particular spending on infrastructure. We also looked at whether spending is essential for capacity building. If it is for non-essential capacity building, we think it should be deferred. And also, we looked at if spending will necessarily increase the wage bill, then or is non-COVID related, then we think that it can be postponed. So we looked at a number of issues. Then I'll move to slide 46, whereby we say in determining where to reprioritize, where to distinguish between essential departments. And essential departments here are those which relate directly to COVID, as well as those departments which assist in providing social relief to the poor, as well as departments which are very key in kickstarting the economy. Those are essential departments. Then our thinking is that non-essential departments should be subjected to relatively more aggressive reprioritization. We move to slide 47, whereby we said in our analysis, we looked at reprioritization by department, by economic classification or functional category, as well as by conditional grant. As you are going to see in the coming slides, we follow that particular sequence. Then when it comes to essential versus non-essential, we have in slide 48 there a list of what we deem to be essential services. These are departments whereby they provide direct response to COVID and social relief, like the health, social development, water and sanitation. And these are departments which assist with the effects of COVID and lockdown, like police and defense, as well as those departments which are essential in kickstarting the economy, like transport, energy, and agriculture. They are shown there in slide 48 in that particular table. Then moving to slide 49, we give an overview of potential areas for reprioritization. We also look at the quantum of spending in the different areas over the MTF and identify the pockets which would be reprioritized within each particular segment there. For example, we show that compensation of employees by national departments in the MTF will be around 596 billion, and there is potential there to reprioritize from, as well as in goods and services. If we look at travel and subsistence, training and development, and catering there's room to reprioritize, as we are going to see in the next few slides, as well as new infrastructure which can be deferred if it is not related to COVID. There is room to defer some spending or postpone some spending there, as well as we are going to see conditional grants to municipalities and provinces where there is room to reprioritize. And looking at slide 50, we look at compensation of employees. We know that compensation is the biggest driver of spending across most the departments, and public servants are really the engine of implementing government programs. But those departments where compensation is excessively high, there is need to reprioritize or to moderate spending, compensation spending in those particular departments, as they are shown in the table below. On slide 15, we also look at goods and services, another area whereby there is need to reprioritize away from towards COVID. If you look at over the 2020 MTF on goods and services, the 41 national departments are going to spend a combined amount of 835 billion on goods and services. So, and there are other departments there, as you can see, or other clusters where there is high spending on goods and services. So we think there is room for reprioritization within these high spending departments within the goods and services. Then travel and subsistence, again, there is room to reprioritize from there, as even if the amounts are small, but there are pockets which can be reprioritized from, because some of the travel is non-essential. Then slide 53, training and development. 41 departments, national departments, will spend about 3.4 billion on over the MTF on training. So we believe if it is not planned training and is not essential, then it can be reprioritized towards COVID-related issues. Slide 54, again on catering services, all 41 departments will spend close to 1 billion on catering. So this is a non-essential item of spending and it can be easily reprioritized. On slide 55, we look at infrastructure, whereby over the MTF, 2020 MTF, public infrastructure spending will amount to 815 billion, and national departments alone are planning to spend 433 billion. And we believe that if it is new infrastructure, is not related to COVID and is not related to kickstarting the economy, then there is room to reprioritize or postpone some of the infrastructure, but with a caution, because some of the infrastructure, if it is deferred, it can create unnecessary backlog. So we need to understand and analyze the full life cycle of infrastructure when we are reprioritizing from the infrastructure spending. Then slide 56 simply shows the same story. I move to slide 58. Slide 58 basically summarizes the conditional grants which the Commission is recommending for reprioritization. It shows the total quantum of resources which will be allocated for each particular grant over the next 3 years. So all this, we identified about 24 grants which we believe both in the provinces and municipalities which we believe can be reprioritized from. And the next slide teases out the rationale, the reasons behind our saying there is need to reprioritize from this particular grant, but all of them are shown in slide 58. What we are actually saying, I'll give two simple examples of why we are saying there's need to reprioritize from some of these grants. In slide 59, I'll give two examples which are community libraries and also the mass participation and sport development grant. These are simply two examples. I'll not go through all the slides. If we look at community library, the grants for this are on infrastructure, building new libraries, maintenance and upgrading of existing libraries, as well as capacity building. These are important areas, but we think that with this particular pandemic on us, some of these monies can be reprioritized for COVID-related funding and defer some of the construction activities, delay some, and put those monies into COVID-related issues. If you look at mass participation and sport development grant, we deem that one to be relatively non-essential, and we recommend the funding to be reprioritized. So in deciding on the extent to which to reprioritize, government should consider that this grant allows for the hiring of staff on a 3-year basis. So this provision allows then for some money to be reprioritized for COVID. So the rest of the slide really look at each particular grant and why we say it can be reprioritized for COVID. I'll skip all the slides and go to slide 66 just to end my session. On slide 66, we are saying besides reprioritizing from national department boards, from entities which are related to these departments and from these conditional grants, we need also to look at other areas where we can get some savings, especially where we can get some efficiencies. There is more room to be more efficient if the high incidences of wasteful, irregular, and unauthorized spending can be reduced, as well as there's a need, especially we have seen with COVID, that it has really increased the adoption of new technologies and new business models. And so we need to embrace digital technology to save more, especially on e-delivery of education, e-learning, and other things. So there is need for us to embrace new technology and save, as well as there is need to reorganize the state through restructuring some programs, especially those which are found with irregularities and fraud and corruption. There is need to restructure and gain more savings on that particular level. And with that, I'll hand over to Dr. Kay Brown to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baku. If you could please just move the slide straight to slide 68. I'm just going to talk at a very high level, just to point to the first point that is on that slide there, to say that we have noted that in the budget 2020, there was no fiscal space. And we have noted that in the budget as tabled in February, the interest debt servicing costs were extremely high, but we are still of the opinion that government should reconsider the fiscal consolidation stance and relax it. We know that for the immediate pressures, this is on the table and clearly would focus more specifically in the more immediate term at social relief. And then in the longer run, absolutely must focus on bolstering economic growth and in restructuring the economy. If I go then to slide 69, we have here, I think, a plea which we made earlier in the presentation to say that we are not sure necessarily whether this gap-filling measure, which we have been discussing now, is going to take us to the stimulus that we would want. We're not sure. We think that it is mostly aggregate demand neutral, and that we do need to look at serious, bigger reforms within government. The critical thing from our point of view is looking at the impact that that has on poverty and inequality, and that is the main focus that everyone must have in re-looking at government spending. And this slide 69 then reiterates some of the things we've said about government spending. It doesn't talk to monetary policy and the revenue side, but I think then I will skip straight over and go right to slide 71, please, Dr. Baku, if you can. Here, I think the important point to make about government reform is that government reform needs to come across all spheres of government, national, provincial, and local. Clearly, in the more immediate present, we are focusing on health more specifically and municipal services in order to deal with literally protecting people's lives. Even here, we are saying that there should be a focus on distributional equity, and we need to look at that within the equitable share or the conditional grants that will be proposed within the adjustments budget. And then the point below that, I think, is a point that was raised earlier as well, but it just is also to reinforce the previous point to say that we definitely need to focus on regional and spatial equity, and that looking at that also means that we need to look at who the beneficiaries are, whether in our immediate responses in this adjustment budget coming and in future budgets for the country. And we need to ensure essentially that the way in which the budget is adjusted doesn't predispose itself to all the ills that we've suffered from in the past. In other words, that we don't have too much concentration in markets, that we do have fair and equitable access for all South Africans. I think essentially what we're saying is this presents us with an opportunity, as well as obviously a great threat that we are dealing with currently. But how we deal with it, all in the how, will determine the future for South Africans. And then just the last bullet to say that the Commission is advising that the adjustments budget, when it is tabled, is processed and adopted with or without amendments as soon as is possible, so that all of government can plan accordingly, both for the increases and decreases in spending that they'll face. Thank you very much.
So Chairperson, we've covered a range of areas from social policy issues and delivery to the economics of the situation we find ourselves in, including in terms of the structural issues that needs to be addressed within the economy. I think a very important matter that we're raising is that we don't see this. We know that the Treasury and the President and the Minister of Finance never said it's a stimulus package. They raised the issue of a fiscal response and the relief. So the media has been running with the fiscal package issues. And the reason is why we're saying it's not a stimulus, because it rescues a number of areas where we will find ourselves in trouble. If it was a stimulus package, it will also start talking about new economies, new market industries. And the view is simple, is that the state creates markets. The state creates markets, more powerful, more fast and powerful, using public financial resources to do that. A classic example, before we go into an amnesia again, the mobile industry in this country, in our country. MTN, Vodacom was established by the state, not by the private sector. The state gave resources into that. And that happened particularly in the time when Derek Keys was around. So we shouldn't forget that the powerful role the state can play in using public resources to facilitate and produce new economies. And that's why we're saying that the digital economy is on us. We just need to be careful that we don't leave the last again, that we bring in the poor and close the gap of inequality and poverty matters. So we need to start looking at the digital economy around a range of areas, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, whether it's in market industries. Our retail economy is going to change substantively. People are starting to buy online and a range of things. It's been happening. There's a lot of other things, Uber, etc. So we're saying that we need to look at, on the one hand, rescue and provide relief for households and our communities. On the other hand, we need to stimulate the economy by bringing about new economies. Where it's got to do with protective, personal protective equipment, to other forms of industry. That's the role of the state. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you so much, CEO and your team. I'll allow honorable members to indicate those who would like to interact with the presentation. Can I have names? Just call out your name, or not too many. Hello.
Mlenzana.
Honorable Mlenzana, good morning.
Morning, Chair.
Right. Next.
Sheikh Imam.
Honorable Imam. Next.
Dennis Joseph. Chair.
Honorable Josephs.
Kaiso.
Honorable Kaiso.
Oscar Matafa.
Honorable Matafa. Honorable Peters, did I hear you? Honorable Peters, are you in? Are you in? Are you still in?
Chairperson. Yes, Chairperson.
Honorable Peters. Do I still have somebody else? I know Honorable Ntlangwini is struggling to come in. I'll put her in. Honorable Tikhala, are you able to get through? Honorable Tikhala, can you hear me? Okay. If honorable members, you can see that I was a little bit liberal with FFC. So you are also allocated 3 to 4 minutes to make your input. You don't necessarily need to take your whole allocation. But can we start in that order? After Honorable Mlenzana is Honorable Imam, number 2, number 3, Honorable Joseph, number 4, Honorable Kaiso, number 5, Honorable Matafa, number 6, Honorable Peters, number 7, Honorable Ntlangwini. Can we start, Honorable Mlenzana? You just go. I won't be coming in after you.
Thanks, Chairperson. I had applied for speaking without my face, Chair. Do you agree? Because the decorum of the House doesn't allow. I'm in the car. Can I continue?
Okay. Please continue, Honorable Mlenzana.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. I will try to rush, Chairperson. I'm reading because there is a lot, so I want to chase my 3 minutes. On slide
3 to 4.
Yes. On slide 20, Prof, the spending by functional classification. Can FFC explain more on that bullet 2? Does that suggest that we should somehow sacrifice this cluster, which relates to security and otherwise, or put the other way around? Which other departments should face the brunt of the cuts? You would notice, Chairperson, that right through we're talking reprioritization. So if they could be specific, I've noted also that going towards the end of the presentation, you have libraries, sport, etc., which are deemed by FFC not as critical as would be with other issues. But then, if we are talking in the same vein, when they are talking e-learning, but you also not take care of looking after development and refurbishing the libraries. Is there no contradiction there? Chair, on slide 25, the revenue and expenditure proposals, that bullet 3 there, it's a comment if FFC can come in. I'm saying here, Chair, the wage bill remains as an elephant in the room. What is the comment of FFC in that? Also, slide 38, they went through running. I've picked up on your young people who you say are unemployed. And then my question is, when you are talking, excuse me, Chairperson, when you are talking of 56.4% of young people which are aged 15 to 24 years as unemployed, are they unemployed or are they unemployable? Chair, I'm trying to rush. Slide 56. Is FFC concerned about the shifting of money from planned infrastructure projects? If that couldn't delay the economic recovery and further intensify unemployment. I, for one, Chair, think that though we have got this challenge of COVID-19, but also somehow it is actually showing us, exposing us to more other challenges. So to me, you could tap on unemployment through recruiting more in terms of trying to curb this COVID-19. The last one, Chair, I'm trying to be very, very fast. Slide 45, the basis for reprioritization. I like these bullet threes. All along, it's bullet three. Spending performance there. How does FFC link the underspending with the capacity spend? I don't bother about your fruitless expenditure and others, but I'm more interested on this one on underspending. Thanks, Chair. I will come back if you give me a second bite.
Thank you so much, Honorable Mlenzana. Honorable Imam.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, FFC, for your presentation. All right, there's a whole list I've got here which should take me the entire day. But I'll consider it instead of, I'm worried, Chair, because on the ground, the reality is something different. We are expected to lose something like about 7 million jobs in South Africa as a result of COVID-19 alone. Many businesses have already shut down, and many more are going to shut down. We have put in measures saying no evictions must take place. We've got a holiday payment. People have not been paying. They don't have the monies to pay. Now, we also know that we're not creating enough jobs in South Africa. The unemployment rate is increasing year by year. I hear some people say that this COVID-19 has exposed us to the way our people live, and that's not true. Because if we as public representatives don't know how our people are living, then what are we doing? The truth is, it's always been there glaring at us. If we talk about, and I see FFC didn't really touch on that one very important thing, which I've alluded to many a times before. Although they talk about corruption, and rightfully so, the amount of money that we lose in the country, which if we could deal with that urgently can save this country billions, hundreds of billions of rands. And that is where you don't get value for money, where we, as this committee has repeatedly been calling even for Treasury to expedite that transparent process of tenders so you get value for money. And that does not seem to happen. You know, with the levels of corruption in the country and what we really recover, and the number of people thus far that has paid the ultimate price for it, it really shows that, we're not serious about it. Now, I want FFC to tell us, given all these challenges and what we know about what has happened in the last 26 years and the direction we are moving, how do they believe we are going to achieve this? Yes, I know what they're going to say, that we need to put these measures, we need to come together. But we've been trying to do this for a very long time. One good example is subsidies for education. And yes, we lose 60% of the money that we allocate for higher education. There's a 60% dropout rate in the first year. So look at the amount of money that you're actually wasting there. And we've highlighted this. This committee has highlighted these things, where it means you need to change the model, that not everybody must go to university or to private colleges, but those who really sincerely and passionate about going and doing that. But because you're making the funds available, everybody wants to go. Now let's talk about the issue of the job creation. We've never been able to do that. We need to do that. Now we have a problem where exports are even going to be a problem. We have a problem with labor in the country as well, because it's too expensive to do business in South Africa. What do you suggest we do in terms of trying to reduce the cost of doing business? Because the only way it's going to come from infrastructure development and the manufacturing industry, creating new industries like you have said. How do you achieve that at the same time trying to reduce the cost of doing business? Because many businesses are not able to sustain that. So I'd like you to actually tell us in terms, I agree with you in terms of cutting down on travel. In fact, we're cutting down already, because nobody from Pretoria needs to come to Cape Town anymore, Chair. Because now they all are going to be, hey, we'll do this virtual. You give us the report, we'll go through it, we'll just ask questions, get clarity. So there is a lot of areas that we can actually cut. Now, I want you to tell me that if we initiated the plan to provide fully serviced sites, all those in this country, a piece of land with fully serviced sites, don't you believe that this can, in fact, improve the economic development status in this country? It will create jobs. You'll have businesses that are going out there. Give them these loans at a low interest rate. I promise you, you will have housing development all over the country. One of the ways we could do it. But, you know, again, we've been speaking about it, and I think you are aware about it. You speak about we've created and started and sourced the Vodacom. You know what happened then? Valuable shares at Vodacom, we went and sold the Vodacom shares, which was an asset to the country because it was bringing us monies in every year. So how do you, I like what you're saying. And yes, we need to create more industries like the pharmaceutical industries in South Africa, in Africa as a whole, okay? And many other industries. But how do you envisage we do this given the current situation where for many years we talk and we talk and we talk, but we're not committed to making the changes on the ground? I'll stop there for now, Chair. I'll come back later.
Thank you, Honorable Sheikh. Honorable Joseph.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just would like to thank the FFC for the presentation, and in particular the proposals towards the end, real practical proposals where government can work on. I just would like to start off with the size and the shape of the public service and what it should be. I'm just concerned, Chairperson, that the conversation has started, and how long will this conversation go on? My concern is similar to the previous speaker, the member, who raised about the whole history of what we are busy with. FFC mentioned that public servants, particularly teachers and nurses, should not take the full brunt. So the question is, I think at a later stage they even refer to fairness. We need to be fair when we spread the responsibility, particularly with the public sector wage bill. So the question I want to ask is will there be a task team with all the range of the issues raised right up to slide 71? Will there be a task team that will be created to deal with all government departments in dealing with austerity measures, and will National Treasury lead and take the responsibility? Because someone somewhere is going to start. Implementation of all these proposals has been made by FFC in many ways, and I'm sure, and hopefully today, the committee will take serious all these proposals that were raised, particularly in the issue of tax revenue that's underperforming. What was interesting is that in many ways we can tackle it, but the tobacco and alcohol on the illegal market, I want to know if FFC can tell us what is going on in that market, and why is government not able to tackle that illegal market, which is now flourishing and costing the government billions of rands. Somehow we have to close that gaps. We must, if we talk about state capacity at the end, that is the area where we must have state capacity, Chairperson, to make sure that the government legally collects money and not allow illegal money to flourish and to continue. I just want to, the issue about essential and non-essential service, I think is a very important point, and it links to slides 48, 49, and 50, all the proposals that came up there. But again, who is going to take responsibility by identifying, or not, it's been identified by FFC, but I'm sure many other areas that is not identified. Who's going to take responsibility to drive this, what we hear today, all the good proposals by FFC? Where's it going to go to? Back to Treasury or to the public service? Who else must come in? And is it Cabinet? Is it Parliament? What committee in government must drive this and take the bull by the horns and say, this is where we start. Every department must contribute, and so that we can move forward on this. Otherwise, we're going to talk in circles, Chairperson. And I disagree somehow with the FFC on the proposals when it comes to health. I understand the refurbishment of facilities all across government, plants, furniture, buying cars, maybe they can extend it, traveling and study tours. I agree with all that. But we can't take too much away from the health department, because this is the crisis, and going forward is still going to be the crisis. So I'm not too keen that we take too much away from within the health department, even if it's tertiary, but with a nice to have, replacing of furniture and refurbishment, here and there upgrading, I would agree that areas, but we should not touch the health department, Chairperson. That's my comments for now, Chairperson. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Honorable Joseph.
I am concerned about whether there will be a task team that will lead all of this. Who will take responsibility? That's my question to the FFC. Thank you very much.
Honorable Kaiso.
Thank you very much, Chair. And let me take this opportunity to thank the presentation made by FFC. My question would be, let me start with this one. There has been a suggestion from the FFC that now one of the areas where budget could be mobilized, I mean funds could be mobilized, is on the area of training. For me, it sounds very controversial or contradictory. So I just want to understand, doesn't it sound contradictory, because we are making more emphasis on training and reskilling of our people? So I just want to understand from the FSC, is that really going to be helpful to us? The second one is, I just want to understand from the Commission that now, given the situation of COVID-19, if you look at the impact of COVID-19 and going back to the depression of 1929, Great Depression of 1929, and compare it with the recent global financial market in 2008, what do you think, or how do you measure the magnitude of this COVID-19, looking at those two periods of the years? And thirdly is on the National Development Plan. Well, we did not anticipate any COVID-19 when the plan was being drawn. But now, given the experience that we are undergoing, the country is undergoing, obviously this also talk to our planning as per the National Development Plan and the Vision 2030. Don't you think maybe some areas would need realignment given this situation that we're currently facing? So no, let me reserve the others for further engagement. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Kaiso. Honorable Matafa.
Thank you very much, Chair. Maybe firstly, let me thank the presentation from the FFC. It's really empowering. Chair, since most of the questions are covered, I confine myself to more broader issues as pertaining to where we find ourselves and where we are trying to go as a country. And the first one, Chair, is on the issue that was presented on slide 11, which deals with South Africa's worsening credit rating. I want to check with the FFC if whether have they examined the general trend in terms of the rating around the globe, and to see if comparatively, how do South Africa stand against all other countries? And coupled to that, Chair, it's a question that maybe it might be beyond the scope of the FFC, still on the rating agencies, to find out if whether when the agencies assess a country, do we have predetermined areas of assessment, or is it done country by country? And saying this, Chair, based on the request that maybe it might be examined across all other countries, I did a little bit of comparison against ourselves and other countries. And it's interesting to see that there's a country called Italy. Italy's rating is put at stable, whereas the South African rating is put at negative. But there's a few comparisons that I did. Their debt to GDP ratio, it's at 123%, and ours is at 62%. The forecast of economic growth for Italy is a contraction of 8%, and our projection is 0.4 growth from 0.7. So there's disparity between them being stable and us being negative. For me, does not make sense, because one of the issues that they raise for them to be at stable is the role of the central bank in Europe that it will play in assisting Italy. Whereas as South Africa, we've also submitted a comprehensive policy response package, including the role of the Reserve Bank in terms of how it's assisting the country to the COVID-19. I just wanted to check if whether they have a view in terms of the fairness and objectivity in these ratings. The second one, Chair, is on the issue of the state and the private sector playing a meaningful role in the expenditure in the country. The presentation speaks to South Africa possibly going through a further recession. But now, as a country, we have been told of an economic recovery plan. And I have a question to say, what is the view of the FFC for the state to assume a developmental role, wherein the country will identify, or the cabinet or government identify certain sectors of the economy where it is participating in supporting these particular entities, particularly those companies that are owned by Black people, women, and the youth, as they are the ones that are hard hit whenever there's economic recession. And lastly, Chair, it's on our fiscal stance, my view that we have assumed a fiscal consolidation stance as a country, and amongst others, to stimulate economic growth and equally to prevent downgrades. Given the downgrade that we've experienced, the less role of the private sector to increase their participation in the economy, as well as a stagnant economy. What is the view of the FFC as far as that particular position that we have assumed of fiscal consolidation is concerned? Should we remain, or should we move, as I indicated, into being more aggressive in the spending patterns of the country by the state leading and the state also playing an active role in the economic activity of the country? For now, I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Matafa. Honorable Peters. Honorable Peters, unmute.
Thank you, Chairperson. I would like to apologize for the late connecting to the meeting. Technology created a problem for me. And I could see I'm in a sling. I've got a challenge with my hand. I'm one-handed now. And thank you very much to the FFC for the presentation.
What happened? What happened? This have story.
The doctor says I've got something called golfer's elbow, and I said I don't play golf. He says it has nothing to do with golf.
Dude, I was darling and play golf. Aren't you playing golf?
No, I don't like it. I don't. Thank you, Chairperson. I just want to know from the FFC. Thank you, Prof. and team, for the presentation. Really encouraging and eye-opening. But I just have a few questions, Chairperson. How is South Africa's credit rating, Prof, comparable to that of other BRICS countries, especially Brazil, which has been ravaged by COVID-19? But also, you say the debt to GDP will rise above 100% by 2021, which is next year. If this does happen, and God forbid, Chairperson, what will be the implications? Because already now, Prof, you could see the challenges that as a country we are faced with. But also, what is the FFC's view with regard to the social relief of distress, the 350 for unemployed, and the top-up of the other grants till October? Do you foresee a situation where this could be another challenge into the future? And this indirectly, in other people's words, is bringing in what has been touted many years ago as the basic income grant. What is the FFC's projections, especially when this grant ends in October, and we are told that we will be facing a second wave of infection, especially if you see the rate at which the infections are growing. Now we are reaching a situation where infections can grow with, in terms of the reports from National Department of Health, almost 1,000 infections per day. And yesterday we were given an indication of the number of deaths that were above 40. So if you look at that, what is it that you are saying with regard to this social relief of distress? On your slide 56, you are talking about reprioritization of budgets from planned infrastructure. Chairperson and Professor, my worry is the existing infrastructure that was put in place. What about vandalism? What about deterioration, issues of rusting, and later on having to redo that whole work if it was done already? But also, what about the escalation cost? Because we know that this industry, especially in the construction sector, is the one that has always huge escalation costs. Right now, we know the examples of Medupi and Kusile without COVID-19. What about the delayed infrastructure? But also, there's a challenge. COVID has driven everybody to his home. We had people who were brought into South Africa because it was said that it's scarce skills. Now they left to go home because of the hashtag stay at home. When they come back, it is another a process. How long, the impact of that waiting, especially now with the challenges in the aviation sector. We're praying that that sector be one of those that open up. But we have seen that that sector was the one that actually, at even a faster rate, transported the COVID or the pandemic. With regard to the contingency reserves, Chairperson, what is the FFC proposing should be a reasonable contingency reserve, especially to avoid knee-jerk reactions like the President and Cabinet had to go and reprioritize at short spaces because of a crisis of this nature? In your view, also not forgetting the fact that you are saying we are facing that a debt to GDP ratio increasing at that particular level. I would want to support Honorable Joseph with regard to the reductions or reprioritization in the health sector. Chairperson, you know we've got a challenge. There's a process of establishing and bring on board the National Health Insurance, and there are 13 sites that are being studied. If there is an intervention in that particular space, we're going to have serious problem. But also this pandemic brings on a new direction for looking at a vaccine, looking at treatments and curing and all those type of things. Now we are told, especially now, Chairperson, you would know in your constituencies, some of the facilities are already having challenges of availability of ARVs and
injury time. Honorable Peters, finish your point.
And lastly, the notion of a non-COVID expenditure being delayed creates another challenge in services not being seen as non-COVID. We now know in our communities, the roads are getting deteriorated. There were floods now recently. Roads and bridges have been collapsed. What is the FFC saying we should do with regard to other services? I know even at Parliament, there was a decision that a particular number of committees that are COVID focused and others are not COVID focused. But Chairperson, there's one thing that I want to agree with Prof and his team on, and that is the reduction of cost on goods and services, especially traveling and subsistence and goods and others. And also it brings in a new way of doing work and business, even for us here in Parliament. Instead of inviting people coming physically to Parliament, we could enable them through this means to connect to our committee meetings, as well as and avoid travel and accommodation costs. And I would want to say, Chairperson, the reduction to the cost of broadband would actually make that even more a reality. Over and above the e-learning, it should also change the way of doing work, working remotely and all those, especially for those who are in the support services. Thank you, Chairperson. I'm sorry for the injury time.
Thank you, Honorable Peters. Is Honorable Ntlangeni, have you connected her? She was struggling. Darren will indicate if she comes in. Did I leave out anybody who still wanted to say something? No. Let me join the honorable members and thank FFC, Professor, CEO, and your team for quite an enlightening presentation. Thank you very much. Perhaps before I even proceed, Honorable Matafa, let's see how far the team goes as far as the rating agencies are concerned and the benchmarking and comparison that we're making. But don't forget, just also have that question when Dr. Mampo comes to the committee from National Treasury. Former Minister Malus used to call her the doctor of rating agencies because she was dealing with the rating agencies. So she'll also help us with that question.
Will do so, Chair.
Yeah. Let me start by welcoming again the presentation, and Prof said I really like your slides 16, 17, and a few others which followed, because those slides they were starting to compare how the situation would have looked like without COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19 on the broad macroeconomic indicators. I think that's very important, that we should always try to do that, so that we avoid sometimes to conveniently lump everything and some of the weaknesses which are already there in the economy and say, no, it's because of COVID-19. Because COVID-19 will come and go, and especially the structural problems in the economy. For instance, the inequality which is there in the economy, especially when it comes to the ownership in the economy. They'll be there. They were there before the COVID. So I'm just saying that it's very important that we should continue doing that, Prof. I think now it's very clear that the economy is misfiring, and will continue to misfire for the whole year and for some time now, as supported by different indicators. I think what we need to do going forward is to concentrate on saying, how do we soften the blows? I think that's important, that we should look in a different way. What are the suggestions coming from FFCs to try and intervene to soften the negative blows coming from the economy? What should be concentrating on? For instance, for me, if you were to identify areas of intervention, the question would be, which are those, and those which would have a bigger multiplier effects in as far as poverty alleviation, employment creation, inequality, and so on and so forth. Let's start identifying those areas, so that when you come to this committee and say, if we were to redirect the resources to these areas, we'll be able to get better and better multiplier effects, and that being supported by science. I would also like to invite FFC that in future, when they come to the committee, that they start looking at the developments around broad-based Black economic empowerment. For instance, one, to say, where are we? And two, the impact of what's happening on the broad-based Black economic empowerment. I think that's very important. In most of the documents that were on the presentations that we are receiving, not necessarily from FFC, the presenters have been very clean on that. Again, now with COVID, we'd also like to see what the impact of COVID is to broad-based Black economic empowerment. Our endeavor as a country to try and change the patterns of ownership in the economy. It's very important. Also, one very important government policy is employment equity. What is happening in the labor front as far as employment equity is concerned? Broad-based Black empowerment and employment equity are the policies of this government. And I think as this committee, and we must also be saying, is everyone aligned to these policies? And two, the type of interventions that are being made by different departments to make sure that this realization becomes a reality. Because it was not just a nice to have. There was big science and a lot of consultations when it came to this thing. So my hypothesis from where I am is that very little is happening. In fact, there's even a school of thought which says we are retrogressing when it comes to these things. So I think it's the responsibility of this committee to look into that. And I would like to say to FFC, we also would like to get your wisdom as far as that is concerned. It's very clear that the biggest impact on our revenues, a shortfall of about 260 billion rand. It's one of the numbers going around. So for me, I want to hear you saying, apart from this reprioritization and so on, and the multilateral institutions that we talk about, what are the other possible sources of income that we can look into? And please try to also benchmark with other economies under these conditions. How do they fund the expenditure, which we can't afford, as we have said? We can't afford to take the foot off the pedal, because there should be, to try and boost aggregate demand, it's very important that we should try and say there's some spending that we continue with. But I'm then saying that as FFC, have you looked at how other countries do this thing, other possible sources of income? I don't want to direct you anyway, but I just want to hear your honest and evidence-based input. Whatever the intervention, both of the fiscal and the monetary policy, is estimated at about 1 trillion rand. But I would like to see that, what are you saying? What is the impact of this going to be from your side? You spoke about the repurchasing of treasury bonds on the secondary market. Why is that important? Why are you sharing that with us? What is its impact? Can you say more about you? You are saying that of the intervention, you see only 95 billion rand, which is new money. Is that really true? What, for instance, has been announced by the South African Reserve Bank, doesn't that result in new money being pumped into the economy? I would like to hear your educated view when it comes to that. Yeah, I think let's leave it at that and give you an opportunity to respond. Yeah, let's see how far you go. You have got up to 25 past, half past maximum.
That's exactly. Thank you, Chairperson and honourable members. That's exactly 32 minutes, isn't it?
There you go. Yeah.
Chair, thank you very much, the Chair and honourable members. Thank you very much for the comments and questions. Really appreciate it. I'm going to continue with how I started off that, and you also acknowledge it and agree to it, that the staff had presented on certain parts of the presentation will respond to it. And then I'll come back into it. But I want to say, because I think there is, we've never said that we need to cut down and apply a measure of austerity on the health budget. It's wrong. It's totally wrong. What we're saying in the slide, if you look at where we talk about the health revitalization fund, the issue is basically there's a need to relook at it, to look at what possible savings is, to divert some of the funds, given that we already lost 2 months in the financial year. And obviously for the take-up of infrastructure build, there needs to be, if it's not an ongoing concern, there needs to be supply chain management processes. And the range of the industries that's involved in a project like revitalization infrastructure build are not back at work because of the COVID pandemic. So I'm urging members just to look at properly at the content of what we're saying. In fact, I said in the beginning of it that we're going to have to ramp up. Ramp up meaning we're going to have to look at how do we remodel the health budget and give more funds to health. Because one of personal protective equipment is a big thing because of COVID. I said raise the issue of pharmaceuticals and the consequences of that also for the supply chain. I raised the issue of field hospitals, which is not the same as other hospitals. For example, the idea of that the ICC in Cape Town will be a hospital. Nazareth Center in Johannesburg will be a hospital. Loftus Versfeld in Pretoria will be a hospital, and so on and so forth, to deal with this. But there's also the whole question of fever clinics I've mentioned, where people go in and be tested in that. So there's no way that we will suggest at all any money is being taken away from health. We're actually saying there needs to be more monies to health. And it could be that more monies to health is already, there's a talk about between the range of 17 to 30 billion rands that needs to be repumped within the health sector. So I just wanted to correct that record. And then the whole question about how do we compare with BRICS countries in terms of the investment rating. Brazil is all at the junk status. In fact, Brazil is 2 classes behind the junk status. So that's the B in BRICS. The R in BRICS, which is Russia. Russia is still at the investment grade, and obviously India and China is at high investment grades, is higher than what we are. So those are the 2 stable economies within rather the 3 stable economies within the BRICS environment. So South Africa is at the junk status. Brazil is all around under the junk status. Chair, just the issue around the wage bill, let's just get it out of the way. I think the point that we're making is that we're going to have to ramp up because of the point that was raised. On the one hand, the point was raised by Honorable Joseph. I mean, if you talk about illegal markets, tobacco, a range of it, and the ports and stuff, it's quite clear that we're going to have to ramp up and expand public employment. The whole issue about vandalism and suggest, again, issue around public employment and needs to be looked at. The point that was raised around COVID-19 and the COVID grants, all I can say on that, Honorable Peters, is that we don't know where this thing is going to land, especially given the consequences to households, to families and households in terms of disposable income. In fact, desperately needed income to assist those families. I've asked SASSA to give us data on the social grant system and the beneficiaries, because that's a clear help us with the benchmark to determine where people are in terms of poverty and how this program is expanded. I'm still waiting. It's around 2 weeks now. I'm still waiting on it. Chair, can I just ask the other staff members, as they presented, just to quickly respond to all the other questions and comments raised? Tando and Shane, and Eddie and Mkululi, can you all respond? And Sasha, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Honourable Chair and members, if I may make a start of this, just following what our chairperson has said, is I think, and also the honourable members have raised the issue around the rating agencies and also the debt to GDP question. Ultimately, I think what needs to be emphasized here is that, you see, debt to GDP itself is not exactly the best measure or the marker to assess fiscal sustainability as such. There are important key drivers, variables, behind the scene variables that determines that debt to GDP. We hear much of, say, rating agencies concerned around our debt to GDP ratio. That is just because it's the first number that people go to. But ultimately, credit rating agencies, they look at a variety of factors, right? If from the top of my head, I can name you 3 ones that they definitely look at. One is the balance of payments. That is our engagement as a country with foreign funds. the export imports, our net reserves relative to that, and basically our, shall we say, the business with the world. And then there is the fiscal credibility. So that is where then we look at, say, the primary budget balance or deficit there, our management, our fiscal management and the credibility thereof, whether we are able to rein in, right, so that we don't spend more than we earn as deficit. And things like that. So that's fiscal credibility. And then there's the financial or monetary credibility, the independence of the monetary sector. So it's a variety of those factors that determines that rating agency. Now, and then why that is so important is because rating agency basically tells the world or gives a mark, right, to say how likely is South Africa able to finance or to pay back the loans or pay back what it's borrowing, right? So, if I may, members, I looked at the the record of this committee. For example, on the 20th of May, the Land Bank came to you and briefed you on its issues around the entity, and then one of the things that the main thing that actually it said is that they were downgraded because they see that the fiscal limits, the fiscal risks associated with the national fiscus, and therefore the ability or the weakening in that ability to for government to disperse financial support to the land bank, and then that had created that rollover, that sort of snowballing effect, right, affecting land bank's ability to pay back their loans. And what happens then with that? My last point with that is that when the credit rating agency says that this person, the borrower, right, can't pay it back, then what we need to do is as the borrower, we need to say, okay, maybe we'll pay you back more, the cost of borrowing. And that is then the crux of the matter here, is that the cost of borrowing is spiking for South Africa. And to the extent that, Honorable Chair, that you mentioned, the repurchase of bond, why was that important? Is because on that particular day, the market was so dubious of our ability as government to pay back those loans that even if we say we will pay you back higher interest, they still wouldn't lend us money. And that's why the Reserve Bank had to step in to basically buy up those bonds, those government bonds, basically lend government money. So as you can see, so one thing that I think that the two notions are quite connected, right? The rating agency and the debt to GDP, and then the connection there is the cost of borrowing. So what then is the recommendation, or the broader recommendation on this matter in particular going forward, is for this Committee on Appropriations, what is, I think, important here is, what you think it's important here is the visibility, veracity and validity of the budget or the appropriation, to focus on that fiscal credibility matter, because that is the issue that is closest to this committee. So I think, we are quite keen to, once the Minister of Finance tabled the adjustment emergency budget, that we come back to brief you, to show you then that to measure that visibility, veracity and validity of that budget, to inform the members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe let me come in and just say, from the macroeconomic perspective, the issue of credit rating has been well dealt with by the chairperson and Chen. So I wouldn't like to add anything else. I think they've dealt with it eloquently. But let me just speak briefly about the tax policy, because the chairperson asked what other sources can we look at. But before we get there, just to say that we view this period as a stabilizing or a period of stabilization in terms of what the tax policy can do now. So we say in the paper that we think any increases in whether you're looking at company tax or income tax at this time is not feasible, because we know that households are under stress. We know that a lot of people have lost their jobs. We know that therefore, whether you're talking about company tax or income tax, those are not feasible at the moment. But what we're saying is that after the stabilization period, maybe then we can begin to look at other things. But then even the scope is limited, really. What everybody has been saying or talking about is the issue of wealth tax, for instance. But wealth tax requires a lot of work to be done before it can be implemented. We know that the committee that was looking at the reform of the entire tax system did look at the issue of wealth tax, and their recommendation thereof was that wealth tax is worth pursuing, but we need to prepare for it. We need to make sure that before we actually implemented everything that needs to be done to prepare the ground is done. So there is that. And then secondly is the issue of targeting super rich South Africans, the issue of high net worth individuals that SARS is looking at. Thus, we think is another avenue to make sure that those people are brought into the tax net, and we can get something from that. And then lastly, it is just to ensure that the tax administration itself, SARS, is capacitated in order to be more effective in collecting more tax, and ensure that they are able to run after, for instance, an honorable member raised the issue of illegal cigarettes. Those are the things that SARS must be capacitated to deal with, to have a specialized unit that look at the illegal activities that contribute to the tax decline. So those are the things that we currently think that are relevant to the tax policy. But for now, we're saying that let's just stabilize the situation, and let's weather the storm. And then after that, we can look at some of these things. Let me end the Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may come in. It's Sasha speaking. There was a question by Honorable Mlenzana regarding slide 20 and bullet 2, and he was asking whether we are saying we should sacrifice the peace and security cluster. But just to clarify that slide 20 was presenting what budget 2020 looked like, what budget 2020 is proposing over the next 3 years. Of course, given the pandemic and associated regulations, departments in that cluster, such as the police and defense, have played a role in enforcing some of the regulations. So what we are trying to say there is that is what the budget 2020 picture looked like. But given the pandemic, as we move towards the adjustment budget, we will need to rethink the expenditure prioritization framework. There was also a question on the infrastructure spending. And traditionally, infrastructure, as you know, has been used as a lever of growth. But given the space is essential right now versus what is relatively non-essential, we do say there is potential to cut even on existing infrastructure spending. But if you look particularly at our narrative, we do caution that if that course of action is followed, and say we cut upgrading or maintenance, it must be based on a thorough understanding of the condition of the asset or life cycle data to determine whether such spending can in fact be deferred without significant deterioration of the assets. So it's not just blanket cutting. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, Chairperson, Eddie here, just to comment on the, just to add, on this whole issue around comparison of the credit rating record between South Africa and some other developed economies. I mean, one of the key considerations which this credit rating agency take into account is the strength of the economy. So when you look at Italy and even to a certain extent Brazil, they are structurally much more stronger than the South African economy. So, and when we look at their income per capita, it's actually very high. So the likelihood, even though they take up a much bigger debt, so the market actually view them as they may likely be able to repay that debt than South Africa, where the economy is very structurally weak. So the comparison is not necessarily straightforward, where we would just say because Italy has got maybe a higher debt to GDP ratio, perhaps the credit rating agency are much unfair to South Africa. They also look at the structural balances within the economy. And then just to go into the question that the Honorable Buthelezi asked about the 95 billion that we're making reference to. So when we make this assessment, we were coming from the premise that when you look at a stimulus in its restricted sense, it will be an additional spending over and above the current baseline. So when you look at what the budget that was tabled in February, which is about 1.95 trillion, a stimulus will be an additional spending either through tax reduction or maybe deficit spending, so that expenditure increases maybe by a significant proportion. But in our assessment, that is it's not happening because you're taking 130 billion from existing budget and you're reprioritizing towards relief. And you also the other funding mechanism, just as we mentioned, it's the 200 billion credit guarantee scheme, which is not an additional on top of the current budget. It's just it's a contingent liability, which is going to likely, whether it's going to be paid or not, is going to likely to increase the fiscal risk. Hence the reason why we're saying the only addition we're seeing from the current 500 billion is 95 billion, which is going to be borrowed. Now, when it comes to the interventions by the Reserve Bank, so there's a debate currently as to whether the repurchase agreement of the bonds in the secondary market, whether was that just general part of the open market operations, which the Reserve Bank does on any day, or was that really part of the stimulus? And when you listen to my colleague Chen, what he said was that at the point when the Reserve Bank intervened at that time, there was a risk of a sell-off. So the Reserve Bank intervened by buying those bonds because there was likelihood that the investors are going to take capital away out of the country, and that would have created a lot of problems for us. And hence, the Reserve Bank was almost forced to intervene by buying the bonds on the secondary market. Now, this brings the argument as to whether can the Reserve Bank afford to buy or afford to buy the bonds directly. Can they finance bonds directly, which is the debate that is currently raging. And that's why we're saying, as part of the stimulus going forward, the government needs to look at whether we can deploy its entire balance sheet, which may also include the foreign exchange reserve being kept. Obviously, that has to be balanced with the fact that the Reserve Bank must always be independent. If that decision is made, it shouldn't be forced to do so, but it should be at its own discretion, depending on the economic situation that will be prevailing at the time. I think, Chairperson, I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other response?
Khululi speaking. I'll respond to two questions quickly. The first question was on one of our principles, which was spending performance. I think we tried by all means when we're analyzing reprioritization to base everything on a set of principles which will guide us. And one of these is about spending performance, and in particular underspend. The question was about underspending. We are aware that the FFC has been talking about the issue of underspending. If there is perennial underspending or a perennial department which is a perennial underspender, I think there is room to reprioritize from that. But in looking at performance, we need to assess it holistically. What are the reasons for underspending? It could be capacity. And if it is a capacity problem, then first of all, build capacity before funds can be cut from that particular line item. If it is a municipality, build capacity first before underspending or funds can be reprioritized from that. So we need to assess the reasons for such performance, and from that, then we can advise to reprioritize. Similarly, on training, I think there was a question about training, whether there is a contradiction. So we agree that there's a need to continuously upgrade the state capacity, especially upgrading state or staff in government departments. There's a need to continuously do that. But we are actually saying that if spending on training is not planned or is not related to COVID-19, then there is a potential there, or there is room to reprioritize that. We know that the 41 departments are going to spend about 3.4 billion in the next 3 years on training. And because some of this training is planned but not essential, and some of it is not related to COVID, then we see some room to reprioritize from that training. Similarly for infrastructure, which I think my colleague has alluded to. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there still anyone, Prof, from your side?
Yeah. Yes, Chair. At the risk of not responding to other members, can I just raise on the reasonable contingency reserve? We don't have an answer for you, because the problem is that the purse is depleted in many ways. And SARS is very clear about the deficiency, the deficit that's going to happen around continuous tax collection. So we will have to come back and think through that. And I think some of the comments and suggestions that were made about a future focus interaction, we are definitely take on board for us. Just to say, on the infrastructure issue that was raised, I mean, clearly infrastructure is has got a productive element to it, but there's going to be a slow take-up on many of these matters. And as a result, because it's a slow take-up, we just need to consider that slow take-up, there's a spending that needs to happen within 10 months or within the next 10 months. It's not going to happen in the way we want it. So there's obviously a need to relook at spending plans going forward on these on these different programs. I think the issue around the size and the shape of the public service, the point is are the task teams? I don't know. We don't know. All that we know is that the statement that was made by the president, which is also our hanger, the reorganization of the state, so that we ensure efficiencies and effectiveness happens within the public service. But the reorganization of the state is not only about public, the structural, organizational structural issues, Honorable Joseph. It's also got to do with how do we reorganize the functionalities and the programs of the state. Let me give you an example. Honorable Imam raised the whole issue of the value for money. If you want to buy a computer, if you want to buy an Apple computer, the issue is we know who supplies the Apple computers. Why must we go through a supply chain system to buy an Apple computer? And if you buy it, you pay 10,000 Rand more on the Apple computer. When you know where the Apple shops are, we know where the Apple suppliers are, we can go directly to them. But there's something in the policy of the supply chain that needs to change. And I think this committee would do great if they start to have a focus on the whole question of the policy of supply chain, supply and procurement. Another point that was raised also because on that is also where the fiscal leakages happens and where corruption happens. And that whole system needs to be looked at. I'm actually suggesting we're at the point where COVID can either be an equalizer or it can further deepen inequalities. And the supply chain system is where we can actually relook at it and look at where the small businesses that actually can fast track purchasing of equipment, but also ensuring a growth in the economy, but also then as a result, the consumption level. Consumption is a big issue within any economy in terms of growth. The remodeling of education, it is quite clear we have to rethink about the education system. The whole thing about COVID, it's pushing very strongly that then we need to look at information communication technologies, the whole digitization of the system. And Chairperson, yes, the honourable members are right, and Honourable Peters and others are right, that we need to think about cutting the cost of data. It's an old issue. It's not a new issue that's coming up. When I worked in another sector, we were saying we need to cut import taxes on books, import taxes on computers, import taxes on learner support material, whereas at the university, whereas in schools, and clearly it provides us with the opportunity on that. On the issue of land and land reform, and everybody must get a piece of land, I think it's clearly what is more important for where we're sitting is that the land reform program has to take in consideration issue of food security, food availability, but also black emerging farmers. We just talk policy questions around that, but if we look at the investments that goes into black emerging farmers, then we need to stand still and think, is that really how we want to treat black emerging farmers? Because they colored, they're Indian, they're African. Is that really how we want to treat them? Is that really the type of investment that we want to make to ensure food availability for these farmers? And why do we continuously juxtapose commercial farmers and their skill set, their access to markets, and the technology access that they have relative to black emerging farmers and food security? It's a critical issue that we have. We were clear on the realignment of the budgets and stuff. We were really talking about the reprioritization. So I don't see the difference between the realignment, the broader conversation on realignment, and how we see reprioritization. But here's the thing that we would like to say to the committee. We as South Africans, we need to be more decisive, very much more decisive, to shut down underperforming programs across the spectrum. Across the spectrum, it doesn't matter whether it happens in national government or in provinces or in municipalities or in state-owned enterprises. Where there are underperforming programs, we need to slash it, because we need those funds to respond to the pandemic, but also to ensure that we install and push new industries. And I want to put the emphasis, it's not going to help us to continuously rescue, and we are not pushing and creating new market industries where everybody has access to it. And part of it is to push the changes in the ownership structure of businesses. COVID gives us an opportunity. I mean, Thomas Piketty, when he was in South Africa, he spoke about this whole thing about democratizing businesses and the economy. And democratization doesn't mean the shop steward or the unions must have a share in business. It means exactly the workers must have a share. And if you'll see, if the workers have a share in market industries, the chances for a surge in the outputs of that factory will work far better. So on the last point on the training cuts, say, the way the training budget has been put together in a classroom setting. 6 feet, 2 meters apart is what's going to be required. We see it in the universities. Our children the young adults can't go anymore in 100% of them to university. The university is talking about a third of them must come to class. And then they will do a platoon system in their own way. The training budgets in departments are based on that. So it needs to change. There's now technology that we need to use. And we need to use technology much more faster, much more quicker, and much more better. And we need to stay away from Zoom, because there are other stuff happening in Zoom while you're in the meeting. you know, people hacking and so other stuff there. But the issue is that there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity here, and I'm asking this committee to think differently about the budget. You need to ask different questions. The way you've asked us this question this time, that's the way this committee must ask the questions to everybody that appears in front of them. And I would encourage that to happen. And I also encourage this committee to note that we've asked the UIF, that I've asked the UIF commissioner for details, for data. And I've also asked the SASA for details and data on these matters, so that we understand South Africa better. We have data sets that sits everywhere in the country. Our data sits in America. It's not sitting with us. I mean, if you just look at the health data, some of the health data, why is health American institutions have greater access to our data than what we have as South African institutions, whether at university, whether in government, about our own data? And in that way, they manipulate the markets. We need to get those sets of data to be able to understand our own people, our patterns of economy, our patterns of movement, and the whole question about how we deal with our own citizens. So I'll stop at that, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Thank you very much, CEO and your team. I think we have got enough food for thought, and I hope we also given you things to talk about. But before I let you go, I can't let you lightly on this one. I raised the issue of broad-based black empowerment and employment equity, and all of you have been silent on it. You want to come in?
Chair, the view that I'm taking is that you say that we need to look at areas of intervention going forward. Yeah. Broad-based black economic empowerment, the whole question of employment equity, the 260 billion shortfall, and the whole issues around secondary bonds you raised. I've then also taken on board the issue about a contingency reserve. What does it mean? How do we get to that? I've taken on board the points that was raised by Honourable on the public size of the public service. And there's a number of others that Honourable members raised on the wage board, etc. So all those points we're taking on board. In fact, what I can say to you in your comments that you made yourself, Chairperson, and the members, you're also starting to help us with a new research agenda. Because what we're having now, it provides us great opportunities now to start building the capacity inside the FFC, contracting those resource services in, to be able to service this committee and the other finance committees in a better way in terms of the key questions that you are raising. And may I just add, your letter that you've given to us, that letter actually helped us to think better through it, because it wasn't as general as usual. So it seems to me there's also COVID has also affected the brain power of the committee to give us this is what we want, not give us the generalities. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Prof. Definitely, I didn't expect all the answers today. Definitely, I said that as we go forward, please look into those things, and when we interact, let's also not allow those very important government policies to fall into the cracks and be forgotten there. As I gravitate towards the end of this meeting, when I was talking about the other sources of revenue, you have started touching on to those things. I was talking about, amongst others, the leakages. For instance, I think there's no finance committee which doesn't talk about illicit financial flows. But I must say that I'll be lying if I say we have had a very cogent presentation from many of the institutions we deal with about the extent of this and exactly what is happening around it and what are we doing about it. The question of BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting, I think these are the areas that we need to look at as the sources of revenue. The prescribed assets, one area that we with South Africa is discussing, and you can't be left out of that debate. I think you need to get right into the center of it, and again, so that as you come to interact with these committees, you're also able to reflect on those things, the downside and the upside of that. The South African Reserve Bank obviously got involved in the secondary market, and perhaps you have given some reasons. What one was saying is that why not primary bond market? If I may just point to Section 13F of the South African Reserve Bank Act, talks about the Reserve Bank being involved there. There may be reasons, but again, we want some independent thinking around that, and want to have as many voices as possible, but more so about an institution like the FFC, which is mandated by an act of parliament to also advise us on these things. One of you referred to the land bank and the financial problems that it's in. Again, if you do some benchmarking, land bank has got a developmental mandate, but it gets all its money from the market. So when they appeared before the committee, there are some problems around that. I wanted to go and relook at the statement, Prof and CEO, of saying there's only 95 billion rand which is being injected into the economy, perhaps from the fiscal side, but the intervention has been fiscal and monetary. You'll agree with me that one of the ways that they do that is a question of dealing with the interest rate, and you've seen the interest rate going down many times. I think, right? It has never gone down at this rate. And again, you start getting your relations that it's a way of trying to say, let the people have got more disposable income, and then which will have a positive impact on consumption and other variables there. It will have a positive impact on your investment, what it does to your aggregate demand, and ultimately what it does to your GDP. So it is an intervention. So I wouldn't like us really to say both the fiscal and the monetary intervention has only resulted in 95 billion rand. I think we need to relook at the statement. And again, the Reserve Bank coming in with what it's saying, with the guarantees it's doing around the 200 billion rand. It's aimed at releasing some money or making it easier for the private banks to lend to the consumers, for them to do a number of things. So there is an impact on that. So I was just saying that we need to be to relook at that. I don't think the statement is absolutely correct. But honourable members, Chairperson FFC, CEO FFC, and your team, thank you very much for the very stimulating engagement. And you could see that the honourable members were on another level in interacting with yourselves. We are going to continue with our meeting. We are free to stay with us. We are People's Parliament, so we've got one or two other matters to deal with, but you are invited to stay. But I would like to thank everybody, thank the staff of SCOA for the background research that they also do for us. Honourable members, this takes us to the next agenda item, which are the minutes that we need to deal with. The minutes were sent to us. I won't be going page by page because I'm looking at my iPad, so the pages may be a little bit different.
Chairperson?
Yes, Prof.
Can we honorably exit your meeting, please?
Yeah, no, I gave you to that, and I said if you wanted to stay, by all means. Yeah, but right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Prof. Honourable members, can we go to the minutes? And I take it that we had an opportunity to read the minutes. They were sent to us. Can I hear the members?
Chairperson, Dennis Joseph, yeah.
Honorable Joseph.
Thank you, Chairperson. I want to go to page 7.
Let's go to page 7, honorable members.
The second last paragraph that refers to the committee feels strongly that the issue of radical transformation in terms of land must be addressed. That is fine. Then the sentence after that says the committee also emphasized the need for the land bank to prepare a position paper and position itself, for seamless adjustments to the potential changes. My question is, that will be brought, of course, by section 25. My question is, the way it's set is almost that section 25 is a given, it's going to happen, which in the process, and Parliament may vote for it or vote against it, but I don't think it is right for us, our committee, to tell the land bank to prepare a position paper to set themselves up in terms of the adjustment and the changes to come. I think the land bank will have to deal with that once Parliament approves whatever it will approve. So all I'm saying is that second sentence in that paragraph is premature. It doesn't need to be there now. Then it means our committee in advance is saying that section 25, they must now already, all committees must prepare, because section 25 is going to become a reality in its current form, its new form, or whatever form, or not at all. So I just think that sentence is premature. I have another point. I just want to stop there, Chairperson.
Please also come to our next point.
Right.
I see you, Honorable Peters.
Yeah, and then on the next page, Chairperson, the paragraph before point 3. The committee asked the land bank if it previously experienced any incidents of corruption within the land bank. A specific question I asked. I think what we must do is add the response of the land bank. It was just sort of hangs in the air, and the land bank responded there was no cases of corruption. I think it's important that we do say that. Otherwise, it's open to questioning. And then the last point is, when the minutes was moved, I moved the minutes of the 6th of May, just in terms of the spelling of my surname. The family surname is Joseph's, but the previous government decided it should be Joseph. So I leave it there. But for now, legally,
so which is the right one? Is it S with or without an S?
Without the S. It's legally without the S in terms of the legality, but in terms of the family, it's something else. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, Honorable Joseph. Honorable Peters, did you want to come in?
Yes, Chairperson.
Please.
Chairperson, I beg to differ with Honorable Joseph. I was trying to scroll down to my minutes because I'm using the iPad for that. But I think the committee was of the view that the land bank as a key institution, and I would remember, despite having had challenges with regards to my connectivity, Chairperson, you did say the land bank is too important an institution to be allowed to fail. And the land bank in itself is a key instrument in enabling and facilitating the implementation of the Section 25 constitutional amendment when it is completed. So the statement there is clearly saying plan positioning. It doesn't talk about a position paper. Any institution of government, Chairperson, I would argue, when there are developments happening at a policy level, at a legislative level, if you've got a mandate directly in that particular space, you need to start looking at scenarios. A scenario that says, if this happens this way, what would then be our response? We would not want a land bank, Chairperson, that wakes up once the constitutional amendment has been done, and be able to say, but we've always been having problems. The land bank in itself, over and above its liquidity problems, is an institution of government that is there. And it reports to the Ministry of Land Reform. Kind of how it's
Finance.
constructed now.
No, it's Minister of Finance. It reports to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance. But
yeah.
It's also
the responsibility.
One of those that has got a straddling, an overlapping type of oversight. So whatever the Minister of Agriculture and Land says, the land bank needs to be alive to that. We have seen, Honorable Joseph, business in itself sometimes even release pre-budget sales and pre-budget that. Why should business be able to preempt and envisage when institutions of government are not allowed? So I think it is important, Chairperson, that the way the Secretariat has captured the committee's sentiments on that day, that the land bank should, there's three important working words that are put together, one of them being position. And I think those words actually says, hi guys, this thing is happening. It is under discussion. If it happens, how are you going to respond? If it doesn't happen, also.
Thank you.
The land bank has always been central, Chairperson, to the apartheid governments, and Honorable Joseph knows, to the apartheid government a mandate on land, and especially the commercial farmers, how they have been empowered. Many of the farmers that are now commercial, that are now so rich, are products of the land bank. So we're saying to the land bank, hey, 9 PS, can you bear it?
Thank you. There's just before Honorable Joseph, there's somebody else.
Yes, yes, Comrade Chair.
Honorable Kaiso.
Yes, Comrade Chair. I want to agree with Honorable Peters that I'm looking at my notes here that now reference is made with regard to the land bank having to position itself in the light of Section 25 Amendment Act for expropriation of land without compensation. So I really want to agree with her that differing with what Honorable Joseph is saying. And I just wanted to emphasize and agree with what Honorable Dupu is saying. Thank you very much.
Okay, honorable members, let me help you. Let me help you.
Chairperson, before you help us,
Honorable Joseph, Honorable Joseph was on the line before you come in. Honorable Joseph.
Chairperson, no, thank you very much. I don't want to disagree on what Member Peters have said. That is the right to say. I myself was critical of the statement when you said the land bank, it's too important to fail. I think I responded to your statement and I said the land bank has failed us in terms of land reform. That's what I meant when I made the statement. So that I'm not against that. All I'm saying is that the land bank now is failing us in terms of the current land reform. They haven't, for me, played their role that they should have played. All I'm saying, the statement there was premature. It should come at a later stage and not now. So I'm not disagreeing with the definition and the principle of what Member Peters is saying. But I'll leave it there. That's my point. Thank you very much.
Honorable Peters, do you still want to come in?
Yes, Chairperson. Chairperson, Honorable Josephs knows that we don't have the luxury of time to be keeping on calling institutions like the land bank to keep on coming before this committee, and also that the committee has got its own fair share of on the agenda. So if the committee says the land bank should follow, that is a working word, prepare, that one, and then position. Those are the three words that I said are very important. And for me, they make sense for an institution of government to be following, to be preparing, and to be positioning itself for situations like this when they arise. So the Department of National Treasury was part of the meeting. And in the meeting, the officials of the Department of Treasury should have picked up this to say the committee says we should then, as Treasury, because it would mean the Land Bank should be capacitated, should be supported by those supporting departments to make it possible that they can do this. So I rest my case, but follow, prepare, and position.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Hello, who's that?
It's me.
Say your name.
Sifiso.
Yes, Fiso.
One critical thing, Chairperson, on the minutes, we don't choose what to put and what not to put as a secretariat.
Yeah.
We only reflect what the discussions were by honorable members. So we don't choose points and we don't decide which one to leave out, but we put what we have discussed. If there are contention issues, we should discuss them at the meeting, and then when we write the meeting, it's a reflection of what was discussed. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Sfiso. You remember before Honorable Joseph for the last time came back for the second time, I just said, let me help the meeting. Two things. Darren, can you please in the minutes include the sentiment which was expressed by Honorable Joseph, which was on that meeting? And I remember him very well saying that the Land Bank had failed us. We need to have that. Secondly, I think the point that Sfiso has started talking into, minutes are a reflection of what transpired in the meeting. What transpired in the meeting. You may not agree with what was said, but there's a true reflection of what transpired in that meeting. And that's basically what I said in that meeting. That's why I was saying, let me help the meeting. So it's properly captured. These are the minutes. Perhaps it may then be a matter arising in future if honorable members still wanted us to debate that. But if we agree that's a true reflection of the meeting, then so be it. And as I said, that I remember Honorable Joseph reading the sentiment, and can I propose that we include that to complete that picture. Committee Secretary, are we agreed?
Yes, Chairperson.
So that's the amendment that we need. Apart from that, honorable members, can I have the mover for the minutes as amended?
Yes, I move, Chair.
Honorable Kaiso moves.
Mlenzana, second.
Honorable Mlenzana, second. Thank you very much. The minutes are therefore adopted with the amendments which have been proposed. Darren, are there any announcements that you would like to make?
No, Chairperson.
When is the next meeting?
The next meeting is tomorrow at 6 p.m. National Treasury and Department of Public Enterprises.
Honorable members, thank you so much. Honorable members, when are you going to send us the link, Darren?
Yeah.
I will send the link immediately after this, Chairperson, as well as the presentation.
Honorable members, Honorable members, if let's say by 6 o'clock you haven't received the link, please contact Darren, because we seem to be having some problems. So let's do it today, but at least we still have got the morning session tomorrow to contact Darren. Agreed?
Yes, thanks, Chairperson.
Agreed. Okay.
Agreed.
Let me take this opportunity to thank all of you, honorable members, for being part of this meeting. As I said, we have thanked the FFC, thank our staff at the background, literally and figuratively. Members of the press who are in, members of the public, ladies and gentlemen. This takes us to the end of the meeting. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.